Funding for Current Conversations is provided by University of Oklahoma President's Office, University of Oklahoma Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Today we're going to talk to two experts on the challenges of being a minority educator. Dr. Roksana Alavi is an expert on human trafficking and American Iranian culture. Dr. Cristobal Salinas is an expert on minorities in education. Join us for these two timely conversations. I want to ask you in a moment about changes in the racial climate in America since 9/11. But before I ask you that, what has it been like in America even before 9/11 for people from the Middle East who are in the United States? Is there a level of racism or what?
Well, thank you for having me here, RC. It's a pleasure to be here today. I think there was actually a level of racism before even the 9/11 attacks. It's probably the most current. We can think about the events that happened that led to kind of a negative sentiments about the Middle Eastern community was after the hostage crisis in Iran in 1979. And given that a lot of people who probably just identify people who look Middle Eastern, and also those who don't, like the Sikh population, were also targeted even before 9/11. I think what we saw that happened after 9/11 was just that escalated. There was something around like 500 some incidents against the Middle Eastern community sometime like a couple of months following the 9/11 attacks. There were the Muslim community reported having like their headscarves pulled, they've been spat on. Some of the most current events have been like students getting beat up, being called, like this young Muslim woman had like her scarf pulled and was beaten, and she was called names like, oh, ISIS, she was ISIS. And so I think there has been some kind of a racism even before and after. There's a lot of people in the Iranian community, which I identify with, that have reported loss of jobs. That's even before 9/11.
How do you read this? Because, my guess is that most Americans know almost nothing about cultures in the Middle East. Does this just come out of a fear of seeing people unlike themselves, not having knowledge of the world? What's your interpretation of it?
Well, people in North America, we're pretty isolated in the world. And we get kind of one story in the media about the people of Middle East. And so there are a lot of people who are not really in touch with those communities. So sometimes people just see one image, and that's what the Nigerian American author calls the danger of a single story. So they hear just one story about us, and they think this is that's us, and that's the only way that for us to be. And they kind of generalize that with the rest of our population without really getting to know really who we are or what our cultures are. And so that kind of a stereotyping can lead to people acting in ways that are probably not exactly positive.
So they're reacting to stereotypes.
They
are.
There's
a single Middle Easterner, and they've made it a threatening.
Right. So they take what a minority of people have done, and they kind of generalize the rest of the population. Now, I think I kind of like to add to what I said is, I don't expect if a white person commits a crime, I don't expect all white people to be criminals. So I don't, because I have a story about the white community, that there's a lot of different kinds of people. So one of the things that I experienced after 9/11 attack personally, because I had been here for 13 years before the 9/11 attacks happened. And I feel like there were just 2 times during that time that my identity and my race was really salient. And one of those, when I first moved to the United States, when I was with my family, when I immigrated here it was 1988. And I didn't really speak English. I didn't understand the culture. So it made sense for me to kind of feel isolated and not a part of things. And so, but after that was really right after 9/11. And I really think it's pretty much stayed that way with me because I get invited. I mean, for 13 years, I pretty much had assimilated, I would say. I wasn't just in culture and integrate. I was pretty much felt like I was assimilated in the community. And so I was in the first year in the doctoral program when the 9/11 happened. Actually, I had just moved to Kansas. It was my first semester. And that first semester, I just started getting invited to talk about Iranian community, to talk about terrorists, to talk about these attackers. And I'm like, I'm a doctoral student in philosophy. Like, I don't really know. I don't have a terrorist gene that I can explain this to you. So I mean, and I feel like that's a kind of where I feel like I became Iranian in America after 9/11. So, and that's kind of stayed that way. You know, I have basically become almost like a spokesperson, if you will. Like if people want to have to hear about Iranian community or I've even had English professors who invite me to their class when they talk about Iranian literature, and I'm embarrassed to say I know very little about Iranian literature. Just like you wouldn't expect all Americans to know about all American literature. So that's a kind of how I feel like for me personally that, 9/11 attacks have really affected me in a very personal way because it makes me feel like I'm the Iranian person who walks around. So I constantly get asked where I'm from, and it's almost as though it's like, and then, like I'm somehow an outsider, and it's like, I never can kind of blend in the sense of normal. I just want to be like, don't see me. So I think that's a kind of what it's been like, that is just my identity is just really out there all the time.
Anything to do about that? I mean, to be always taken as a stereotype. I mean, it's sort of the essence of racism, I think. I mean, is there anything to do about that? How do you have an ideal response you would like to get to somehow and counter it?
I mean, I think the answer to that is really simple and really difficult at the same time, because I want to say, I don't expect people to be blind, race blind, or say, I'm colorblind, because if you're colorblind, then you don't see more than half the population in some places. So, or I would say the world probably. But I think people should just acknowledge that people come and I love them, get to know the persons instead of their stereotypes or the culture, or because, for example, I don't identify as Muslim, but I've been in colleagues' communities where people ask me, "Oh, are you finding something to eat?" And I was trying to figure out how this person knew I was a vegetarian. And then I come to find out, thinking I'm looking for something halal or appropriately Muslim treated food. I don't know how to also put it, food. So, I mean, I think those are the kinds of stereotypes that I bring with myself in a place that I walk in. And I would kind of like to be known as a person. I mean, just John Rawls talks about, he's a political philosopher, talks about like the basis social respect. And I think that's a kind of what I would hope for every single person in the community and the world, really. I mean, just it's an asset that a lot of us who may or may not have, or I should say probably don't have, take for, let me just rephrase this. Those of us who have it take for granted, or those of us who don't, that's just like the most basic thing, I think, to have. Just recognize that people are different, but at the same time, people are people.
Especially in an age of globalization, that
Right.
is the future. It seems to me there's a kind of urgency here. Americans are very isolated,
Right.
a little xenophobic, kind of afraid of just cultures unlike their own. There's a really important issue. Something positive needs to happen. They need to break out of that xenophobia, right?
Well, yes, but at the same time, I think there are some kinds of things like the government can do. I mean, there are kinds of things the media, I mean, just about the time, we've been over 30 years from Iran hostage crisis. Just about the time that a whole generation of children are born, both here and in Iran, and a second generation of Iranians have grown and gone into public and have gotten jobs. We're starting to get to know more and more Iranian people. Argo comes out. So it's a kind of like, oh, but see, these are not those people. So it seems like, the way I see it is like the background of my identity is Iran hostage crisis. And just when I feel like we could move on, like movies like Argo comes out, that is just a kind of like almost confining again. And it gives a whole new generation of people. I mean, whether or not it's some parts of it are Hollywood, some not, but at the same time, it's just that puts the crazy people in the kind of the back of people's minds, I think, all over. And I think those are the kinds of things that somewhat irresponsible, socially irresponsible in this kinds of climate to bring these back to the front of a whole new generation of Americans when they don't have another story about us. That's the only story they're getting.
As I listen to you, the word that comes to mind, of course, is Orientalism.
Right.
And that thesis that in the West, there's this caricature of the Middle East and Middle Eastern cultures. And I think you're talking about that showing up in your life and the life of the
Right.
Iranian American community, the ugliness of that large stereotype of Eastern people somehow being outside of culture. I think
Right.
Westerners want to act that way sometimes. I've got to think that the influence of the presidential candidates right now is not helping matters, because isn't there a lot of stereotyping going on there about the Middle Eastern community?
There is, and those are the kinds of stereotypes people already had. But I think when you have people in power, when you have people who are respected in the community, when people who have following, the things they say affect what people gives permission.
License too.
Yeah, right. Gives license, gives permission to people to act. So when you have presidential candidates come out and say, we're going to deport all of the, all of the Muslims, or we're not going to allow, or this population do this kinds of things, or Mexicans bring in drugs and crime here. So you're going to have people are going to listen to that because this is somebody who's got a voice. And so I think what it does, it allows actions. Words are not just words. Words actually, I think, promote kinds of action. So they have a lot of power. And I think that when the presidential candidates who got the mic come out and say these kinds of things, it allows those people to act on the racism.
Maybe especially during a time where there's a lot of economic transformation and
Right.
globalization is happening. People are a little bit vulnerable. Maybe they're too receptive to simple explanations of creating a...
And I think also fear. I think that, we have to acknowledge that there have been some events that have kind of scared people. So we don't want to discount the fact that these things are happening in the world. So people are already on the edge. So they're kind of waiting for a simple solution. And I think just demonizing a group of people is just a simple solution. And it's, so that's irresponsible to come out and say, well, if we just get rid of these people, these problems will be solved.
It seems like it's a kind of mental laziness, except
Right.
it very quickly becomes something deadly.
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to demonize, and it also puts a responsibility of everything that's wrong in a particular really small group of people in the world.
And I think you're saying too that maybe the particular difficulty of being an Iranian American is the hostage crisis and having that sort of brought back up in the culture because of the stereotypical images that get
Right.
attached to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, if you could say something to millions of Americans that would really help them to think about and maybe be more nuanced in their response to people from the Middle East, what would you want to say?
I kind of feel like I've already sort of answered that question, but I'll repeat it. I think it's the idea of just to kind of getting to know people as people and not really stereotype and bringing stereotypes to a group of people. And that's really not just about Iranian Americans, it's about everybody.
Yeah.
It's when I walk in the classroom, I don't just generalize my students. We're predominantly white students. I don't generalize that they're all in a particular way. I'm actually especially particular about all these negative stereotypes about the millennials because I think they're such an incredibly driven population, and I'm really careful not to think about all of the other negative stereotypes that come from the media about them. Yeah. So I think I kind of feel like it's really about respecting other people and thinking about people. Every person has value. Every person has a value, and every person has dignity, and that should be respected. To kind of bring them in there and not generalize people, learn about people. I mean, it's really like when there are, for example, events about cultural events. I mean, it'd be nice to go to see what other people are like. What is their food like? So I think not generalizing people is a really important way.
It sounds like you're making a couple of points. Maybe we all generalize, especially when we're tired, and we kind of fight against that. But I think you're talking about the particular gravity and seriousness of generalizing a whole community.
Right.
And then not being willing to change. That really, can the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity, the conference that we're at right now, can it play a role in countering that tendency in the culture and trying to push things?
I'm really glad you asked that question because I have been coming to NCORE for 4 years now, and I, in the whole dialogue about race, the Iranian, for the most part, Middle Eastern communities are not really discussed, for especially Iranian Americans, because the Arab Americans been discussed. Actually, I think there's been quite a long time when the Arab identity has been within the race dialogue. And there's been talk on Islam, but a lot of Iranians don't identify as Muslim. Unlike, again, what the media tells you, a lot of Iranians, so Iranian identity is really separate from the Arab identity or from Muslim identity. So
Iranians don't speak Arabic, for one thing.
Right, exactly. And that's something a lot of people don't even realize.
Right.
So I think one of the things that my cousin and I have done, and I've done in the last, and when she wasn't able to come, and we presented on Iranian American community here at NCORE, and I think to kind of engage in the idea of race and the race dialogue that, and it doesn't exactly help that United States Census identifies us as whites. So I think just to kind of bring out that we know we're a population. My cousins and I, again, we presented here, and we're talking about, they tell us we're white, but we're really not white on the airport. So,
yeah.
I think that being involved, being engaged, and making allies with other communities of color is really helpful for us.
Facilitates
and
that.
Absolutely. NCORE has been a really great venue, and not just for us in the Iranian community. We actually bringing in a lot of people from like Afghani American communities in our sessions, that they're finding a space where, because again, they are in the same boat about that they're not really considered Arabs, but they're from the Middle East, and they're also left out about this whole dialogue about race. So a lot of that comes in. So my real hope is to just being able to build allyships with other communities of color.
I'm going to ask you to really stick your neck out now.
Okay.
Look into the future.
Okay.
10 or 20 years. Tell us something that, predict something that you think will happen, that will have an impact on the Iranian American community, good or bad, but something that you basically have a pretty clear vision of as waiting for us out there on the horizon.
So a lot of Iranians who came here after the revolution, and or even during the time of revolution, they went to college, they graduated with degrees, and they were not able to get jobs because of the hostage crisis. So a lot of those are my uncles or my parents' cousins, but they were not able to go home, because if they went home, they would have to go join the war efforts, and none of them wanted to go to war. So that whole generation really became business owners, so that they kind of became a part of the community, but in a different way. They didn't integrate within the community as much. So their children, which will be kind of my generation, maybe a few years younger, maybe I would say a decade younger. So their children are becoming more integrated in the community, and my hope is that they bring in some positive images, and the people would really kind of get to know the Iranian Americans in the United States, and that would bring some kind of positive change, that would change people's minds. And what I really hope for is that we will make allies with other communities, that I'm really hoping for some more kind of more cohesive Iranian American identity, because again, when your community is so negatively stereotyped, you try so hard to push away from it. I mean, I did, because one of the first things I was told when I moved to the United States when I was 15, that Americans don't like Iranians. And so for me, I worked so hard to just stay away from that as much as I could. So, which I couldn't after 9/11, right? So I'm really hoping for more cohesive Iranian American identity, that as a community we can come together more. Because right now there is also a division between the Iranian Americans that identify as Muslim and those who don't. I mean, there's a lot of tension going on here too. And also, I'd like us to make allies with other communities, South Asian communities, other communities of color, to just to kind of, strengthen our power to kind of to have more voice in our society, to stop being so invisible in our society.
I like your vision for the future.
Thank you.
Dr. Roksana Alavi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, RC. It's been a pleasure.
Dr. Cristobal Salinas, thank you for being here on Current Conversations. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
The numbers of Latino students at every level in education in America being admitted to colleges in record numbers, but they're not graduating. They're dropping out. Would it help to have more Latino teachers and faculty? I mean, could that make a difference in this picture?
So great question, right? So I think of the work that I do, my research, and I study the socialization of Latino male faculty in academia. And one of the few of the arguments that I make, but also supported by the literature, it talks about how having someone that looks like you, that sounds like you, that have similar social identities, and that you're able to relate with that individual, you're more likely to be successful. I also have I have the argument, and based on literature review as well, that the most powerful role model that anyone can have is an educator, because the student is with that individual, right? Now, when we speak about faculty at the university level, it's a different type of thinking, limited hours, but if the impact still the same as if the educator was in the student and the educator were in the K-12 system. So when we translate that to higher education, meeting with our faculty, it's still the same impact because faculty are making an impact on students. So it is important to continue to have Latino, Latinas in higher education as faculty. Now, we need to look at the trends of our data, our numbers, and I'm gonna go a little bit back because that's the numbers that I have. First, in the cohort of 2011 and 12, out of all the earned PhDs in the United States, there were 5,000 Latinas and about 4,000 Latinos. And then I break that down by field. And in the field of education, there was only 423, I believe, Latinas and 220 Latinos that earned a PhD in education in 1 year. That's very problematic because that's less than 1% out of all the PhDs that were given in the United States. So when we translate that into what does it look like in the classroom, that doesn't mean that everyone that earns a PhD or a EDD or doctorate degree are going back into the classroom. Many of them are going to be practitioners as they didn't have a positive experience in their doctorate degree. So they go and do other things, policy or be a practitioner within the field.
When a Latino academic gets hired, somebody with a PhD, do schools do a good enough job of retaining them? I mean, you think, okay, finally we've got somebody inside and this person can do a lot of good. And you gave some wonderful evidence earlier that the impact on students can be huge. A professor to identify with, possibly teaching ethnic studies classes, or at least that dimension may come into their classes. Do universities do a credible job of retaining Latino faculty once they're there?
Well, literature tell us no, the literature review, but I can speak on that, and I can also speak on my experience, my limited experience as a faculty. I think for me, it's been more of finding, so let me go a little bit back. I think when we understand the experience of Latino, Latina faculty, they face many challenges, right? And that is understanding and negotiating the culture of the department, the college, but also the university. As oftentimes
it can be very complicated.
Correct. Yeah, and they're oftentimes they're required to do research, teaching, and service, but they're always invited to do everything in service because they are more likely to be the only Latino or faculty of color, oftentimes.
So let me just make sure, because some people won't know this area as well as you do. So somebody, a young Latino professor like you could be invited, or maybe even some ways pushed, to be on 10, 20 service communities
Correct.
for the university, but you've also got your day job. You need to teach your students and grade papers and do research, and the job could just expand out beyond what's doable.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that we need to also look at, how universities are tokenizing our faculty, faculty of color, Latino, Latina.
And working them to death, basically.
Yes, yeah, so they're on the front page for diversity. Here you are, and because only because I'm of color or Latino, I'm invited to be in a lot of diversity committees, not only in my university, but also across the country, right? Or do presentations, which that's my expertise because I happen to study that. But also oftentimes we see faculty that they don't even study that, but they do that. I think that if academia refuses to change, we will slowly change academia.
It seems to me that ultimately what we're talking about here is social justice, to bring more Latino students, students of color in general, into higher education, into the culture itself. What role do you think organizations like the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity, the conference we're at right now as we talk, where educators come from all over the world, really, but certainly the United States, talk about these kind of issues. What role do you think these organizations can play in the kind of effort you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I see NCORE, and organizations like NCORE played a significant role in that work that we're trying to do back in our campuses, as they provide with the best practices or promising practices, and also research that oftentimes we don't have access to, right? Because we might not be the experts on the field. But I think it starts the conversation where oftentimes we're afraid to start the conversation
Which is the motto of NCORE, start the conversation.
Yeah. So I think that we're doing that. And I don't think we're gonna change, we're gonna be so inclusive within the next 10, 15 years. It's gonna be a long process, right? Because once we cover one issue, we have another issue, and I don't wanna call it issue or challenge, it's a reality, because those are realities that we face every day, the realities of our community. But I think creating awareness, and that's what we're doing, but also providing the space to start this conversation, because when we go back home, oftentimes we do not have the space to speak about our experiences of oppression, racism, microaggressions, or even privilege that we often have as faculty or educators.
Dr. Criss Salinas, thank you very much for being on Current Conversations today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.